Hello everyone and welcome to my first cake tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make fondant roses. So today to make a fondant rose we're just going to need three simple things. We're going to need fondant, we're going to need powdered sugar, and then we're going to need like a carrying case to put them in, like an egg crate here. So in order to make the fondant rose, what we will be doing is just a couple of steps. First thing is, like I said, with the fondant, you're going to want a ball probably about this size. You might not even need this big of a size. I particularly like to start out with a white fondant, but you can pre-color your fondant if you'd like and make it like a pink, a purple, anything like that. It would be a little bit probably lighter of a color than if you were to say paint it afterwards with food coloring, but I particularly like to start out with white. So the first thing we're gonna do in order to make these fondant roses is I'm gonna kind of work with the fondant here, soften it up a little bit, and I'm gonna take just a small little piece to make the center of the rose. So the center of the rose here, as you can see on my fondant flowers, they're all different sizes. I particularly like them when they're a little bit smaller, but just like in nature, no two things are the same. So if one of them's got a little bit bigger center and the other one's got a smaller one, once you put them all together on the cake, nobody's gonna know. So you're gonna take the fondant, roll it into a little ball, and then I'm gonna kind of put a point to it here. And I'm gonna kind of show you on the side, just like so, a little point, and set it down here and kind of flatten it out. So you want it to kind of look something like that. I'm gonna show you on the side to make it a little easier. And this will be the center of our flower. Don't worry too if the bottom of it's a little bit thick right here, and you'll see when I add petals, because when we're done, we can go ahead and trim it up. We'll make it look perfect, or at least the way you want it to look. So the next thing you'll do is grab another little piece of your fondant here. If your fingers are getting a little sticky, that's pretty much just what the powdered sugar for, just to make sure that your fingers don't get all stuck on the fondant. So what we're doing with this little ball of fondant is we're actually pushing out and we're gonna start making some petals here. So the key to a really good petal, it's kind of flat like so. It doesn't look super pretty right now, but you want it to be thin on the tip. So I'm kind of showing you a little bit different angles here. The thinner the petal is, the more realistic the flower is gonna be. I wouldn't even worry if there's like little dents or anything like that in the petal, because I do feel like when you have that, it makes it look more realistic. Nature and flowers aren't always perfect, so the more realistic you have them to me like that, and the more you've got little imperfections, when it all comes together, I think it makes it look very real. One thing when I do cakes, especially like wedding cakes, birthday cakes, and I put these little fondant roses on it, I always get the question, is it a real flower? So that tells me right there, with all the little imperfections, things like that, that they do look realistic. We're gonna take the first petal, just wrap it around like a little blanket here, and we're gonna just set it back down. See, it's kind of getting to be a little bit of a big base, so it's easier to set it down. And we're gonna start working on the next petal. So also another thing with flowers is I don't come in knowing how many petals I wanna do. I don't have a certain set, like 7, something like that. I kind of just take every flower as is, and I kind of work with it, and to me, I just know when it's done because I can tell it looks just perfect for me. I'm like, that's it, that's the rose. So I don't go into it pre-planning it too much. I kind of just take it petal by petal and see how I feel about it. We're gonna do another big petal, and I do put them down here very randomly too. I don't wanna put them one after the other after the other. I kinda wanna just see exactly where I feel it needs to go, because just like with a regular flower, you wanna make sure that it is, just the right spot, as well as it's not always perfectly symmetrical. So right there's where my next petal is gonna go. So just gonna wrap it around again. Because you've been working with the fondant, it's a little warmer. It should just stick to the other piece of fondant, just like so. Also, we'll open up the petals in a few minutes, but right now we're just gonna at least start with the first 2 or 3 petals. We're gonna roll it up in a ball just like so again, and we're gonna just start pressing. Rose fondants aren't super hard. They just take a little time to play with them and, just kind of work with them. To me, I particularly find them much easier than buttercream because I'm using more of my fingers, and buttercream, you're kind of at the mercy of a tip. Same thing with royal icing, you're at the mercy of a tip and doing different techniques. And this, I feel like I've got so much more control because it's my own fingers working with it. The one thing about a fondant rose, though, I always do tell my people who order cakes from me, I do need normally about a week for them. I like to have them harden up for about a day, probably more like 2 days before I think about painting them. Then once I paint them, I like to have them set for about a day or 2 as well, just that way that the food coloring can set and it doesn't transfer to my cake in case like my cake is got buttercream or something like that on it. So here's another petal. We're just gonna attach it as well. And right now you can start seeing the beginnings of a bud. I'm gonna now start kind of toying with the petals just a little bit. Honestly, this is a beautiful little bud too. You could trim up the bottom of it if you want to do just a simple rose bud. I do think that is important when you do a bouquet of flowers, doing all different sizes. Kind of like here, I have a tiny little one right here, whereas I've got a bigger one here. This is, I know it sounds weird, one of my favorite ones. I love the fact that it has this kind of little nick right there because I feel like it makes it look like a real rose, because real roses have that. Once they're painted, you'll see, I'll definitely post a video just to show you, they're quite beautiful. They end up looking very realistic. I use the powdered food coloring, add a little bit of a liquid to it, and then paint them, and they end up coming out with this beautiful velvet-like texture, just like a real rose petal. And they are quite nice. Red's one of my favorites, and that's probably the most requested I get. I've done everything from purple, I've even done blue, I've done all different colors, and that's also another thing that's really cool about these fondant flowers. Not only are they edible, but you can pick whatever color you want. So even if it's not in nature, you can make it yourself. All right, let's go ahead and wrap another one here. So I'm gonna just kind of choose this spot here. And like I said, once I start doing these is when I really start to get an idea of how many petals I wanna do. So like right now it's looking really good, but you know, I still wanna add a couple more on there. I don't feel like it's quite ready yet. So do a little bit more fondant, same ball like before. And there we go. Let's just start kind of making sure our fingers aren't too sticky. Let's just start working with the petals. Same as every other flat petal, let's try to make them thin and beautiful, and it's gonna work out really good. But yeah, these are one of my favorite ones to make because I just think they look so pretty when they're done. Especially like I did a wedding cake years ago, and I just had cascades of them, and I just thought they were so pretty, especially when they're painted. Just looks really nice, and they, with a little practice and just a little bit of patience, you get them. So we're gonna add another petal on here, and she's coming along really well. So keep in mind here at the bottom, we still have, I'm gonna just add that in there. There we go. I'm gonna kind of just tweak it a little bit with my fingers here. And there we go, just like so. And it is a little bit thick still at the bottom, like I was saying earlier, but don't worry about it. We're gonna trim it up once it's hardened a little bit. So you don't even need to worry about that. And you can always add it to like a little piece of wire and maybe cover it in some chocolate fondant to make it look like a rose stem. You can do that, that's pretty cool. Or just keep it as so and just make it a beautiful bouquet in the arrangement on top of a cake or on the sides of a cake, anywhere like that. When I do put the flowers on a cake, I always do them in odd numbers. I know that sounds, that's one thing I always remembered from when we used to have to do floral arrangements. It's always odd numbers, just makes it look a little bit more balanced. So, you know, it's your choice though, but that's just what I've always kind of heard. All right, and I think this might be one of our last petals right here. There we go. So she's looking really good right now. And that right there, I particularly think that I would stay right there with this one. I wouldn't do much more with it just because sometimes I think the best is just leaving things as they are and not going too crazy with them, because if you add too much, sometimes it can be, you know, a little over the top. On the fondant, like I said before too, I always like to add a little piece of fondant down here on my egg carton, just like so. I'm gonna put another piece in there just to make sure it's tall enough. And then I'm gonna just lean my flower right there. Now you can kind of tweak it a little bit more. And like I said, let it sit for at least a day. This one I did yesterday, and it just kind of helps. This one I did a little bit earlier today. And it just helps to harden up. So once they've hardened a little bit more, like so here, then you can pop the bottom of it off, which is what you have on the bottom, and you can trim it. But you want a little bit of a base when you start placing the flowers on the cake, that way they don't fall over and they can stay put. But before you do any of that, unless you want white flowers, definitely paint them, let them sit, like I said, for at least a day or so, especially with the food coloring paints and the gels and the powders, just because if you're on a wet buttercream or anything like that, the color could transfer if they're not really dry. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little tutorial. I'll do another one, like I said, in a couple days showing you how to paint them. And hope you had fun today. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and happy cake decorating.